Silver service dining at 60 miles an hour, observation cars designed as moving salons, cabooses where crews kept watch over every mile of freight. These weren't fantasies, they were everyday realities on American railroads. Then nobody saw these trains anymore. By 1970, the Super Chief was canceled. Steam locomotives that once numbered in the tens of thousands were nearly all scrapped. Entire crew positions ceased to exist. The machines that connected cities and defined communities simply vanished. To understand why, you have to go back to the world they left behind. Inside a classic passenger coach, the world felt different. Plush seats lined up beneath Art Deco light fixtures, each one angled just enough to catch the passing scenery. The steady rhythm of the rails set the pace for conversations. Some whispered, some bowled, while sunlight flickered through wide, clean windows. In the observation car, travelers settled into deep armchairs, swiveling to follow the sweep of rivers or the rise of distant mountains. The rear platform, open to the wind, became a stage for quiet reflection and chance encounters. Here, strangers became companions, and the journey itself took on a sense of ceremony. The dining car was a world apart. White linen and polished silverware set the tables, while porters in crisp uniforms moved with practiced grace. Meals arrived under silver domes, roast beef, fresh rolls, and vegetables arranged with care. Glassware chimed softly as the train rounded a curve. The air carried hints of coffee and cigar smoke blending with the faint scent of steel and varnish. Etiquette ruled these spaces. Jackets were required for dinner, conversation was kept to a gentle murmur, and every course was served with a certain formality. A bell signaled each meal, and guests made their way down narrow corridors, shoes clicking on tile mosaics. Late at night, the observation lounge transformed. The lights dimmed, and voices dropped as passengers watched the countryside slide by under a canopy of stars. Some lingered over a final drink, others read quietly, lulled by the motion. The staff kept watch, attentive but unobtrusive, ready with a fresh cup of coffee or a warm blanket. For many, these rituals, sharing a meal, watching the world unfold from a moving salon, became memories that lingered long after the journey ended. A railroad museum curator, recalling his first ride as a child, remembers sitting in a dome car, eyes wide as the horizon opened in every direction. He speaks of the hush that fell when the porter announced dinner, of the gentle pride in every gesture, and of the feeling that, for a few hours, the train was its own small society. These moments, ordinary then, now feel rare. They are echoes from an era when luxury and community traveled together on steel rails. Railroad companies poured imagination and money into selling the dream of train travel. Glossy posters promised a world where elegance and speed went hand in hand. Names like the Super Chief or the 20th Century Limited became shorthand for luxury, their images splashed across magazines and billboards. Advertising campaigns showed polished cars gliding past mountain peaks, well-dressed couples dining at linen-covered tables, and porters standing ready with a quiet smile. These images were not just about getting from one place to another, they offered a taste of status and adventure. But behind the glamour, every detail was shaped by a different kind of calculation. Designers worked with architects and engineers to craft cars that looked modern and felt comfortable, even if that meant extra weight or complex interiors. Heavyweight coaches from the 1940s, built with wood and steel, were made to last and to impress. Wide seats, thick upholstery, and ornate fixtures gave travelers a sense of importance. The plans for each car showed an obsession with comfort. Some coaches held as few as 64 passengers, with room for smoking lounges, reclining chairs, and even private compartments. In the streamlined era, stainless steel cars gleamed in the sunlight, promising a new kind of sophistication. Air conditioning, reclining seats, and panoramic windows became selling points, all featured in company brochures and radio jingles. Railroads competed fiercely to outdo each other, commissioning artists to create scenes of effortless travel and speed. Some posters even exaggerated the length of the observation car, stretching it into a vision of endless possibility. Brochures boasted about airflow systems and shock-absorbing trucks, making each ride smoother than the last. Yet these comforts came at a price. Heavyweight cars were expensive to build and maintain, and their ornate interiors made cleaning and repairs a constant challenge. Streamlined cars, while lighter, still required careful handling and regular updates to keep up with changing tastes. A curator stands beside a faded Pullman seat and reflects on this era of design. He points out brass reading lamps and the intricate patterns on the seat backs, marveling at the care that went into every detail. He says, "They wanted you to remember the journey, but they built these trains for a world that was changing faster than anyone realized. The very features that made these coaches feel special, weight, luxury, and style, would soon become burdens as technology and economics began to rewrite the rules of the rails." Steam engines once ruled the rails, but by the late 1940s, a new kind of power was quietly taking over. The diesel-electric locomotive, with its boxy shape and humming motors, began to appear on main lines that had echoed for decades with the thunder of steam. The change was not just a matter of technology, it was a revolution in economics, labor, and the very rhythm of railroad life. A fireman from the old days remembered the heat that came with every mile. He spoke of shoveling coal for hours, sweat stinging his eyes, the firebox roaring just behind his back. He said, "You worked for every inch. Every run was a battle against the elements and the engine itself." With diesel, that struggle faded. There was no coal to shovel, no water to haul, no ashes to dump at the end of the line. The cab grew quieter, the work less punishing, and the sense of ritual began to slip away. The numbers told a clear story. Steam locomotives burned through tons of coal and thousands of gallons of water just to make a single trip. Maintenance was relentless. Every week brought inspections, repairs, and the constant need for skilled hands. A steam engine might run 1,500 miles before it needed to be torn down for service. Diesels, by contrast, could go 100,000 miles or more between major overhauls. Fuel costs dropped by half, sometimes more. Where steam engines needed a crew of 4 or 5, engineer, firemen, brakemen, and more, a diesel could run with just 2 or 3. For railroad companies, the savings were impossible to ignore. Diesel engines also brought a new kind of reliability. A fleet of EMDF units, each one delivering up to 2,000 horsepower, could be coupled together for heavy freight or long passenger runs. They started in any weather, needed no warm-up, and could be serviced with off-the-shelf parts. In the yards, early adopters like the New York Central and Pennsylvania Railroad found that diesels cut turnaround times by as much as 40%. Santa Fe's famous F units slashed the time it took to move freight across the West, keeping trains moving and profits rising. The infrastructure shifted almost overnight. Coaling towers, water tanks, and roundhouses, once the beating heart of every division point, stood empty or were torn down. By 1960, more than 80% of these steam-era landmarks had vanished, replaced by simple service tracks for fueling and light repairs. The railroad landscape grew leaner and more efficient, but also more anonymous. The smell of burning coal faded from the air. The sound of a steam whistle gave way to the steady drone of a diesel horn. Beneath the surface, the transformation was about more than machines. It was about people, jobs, and a way of life that had shaped communities for generations. The fireman's story, echoed by thousands of others, marked the end of an era when running a train meant hard labor and deep pride. The new engines were faster, cheaper, and easier to run, but something vital was left behind on the tracks. Steel rails once demanded eyes at every crossing and a human presence at the end of every train. For generations, the caboose was more than a rolling office. It was the lookout post, the last line of defense against disaster. From its cupola or bay window, a conductor watched for shifting loads, overheated axles, and signals missed in the rush of wind and steel. But as the decades pressed on, machines began to take over the work of vigilance. Centralized Traffic Control, CTC, brought the first wave of change. Instead of a patchwork of towers and hand-thrown switches, dispatchers could now manage entire territories from a single room, their eyes fixed on glowing panels that mapped each train's movement in real time. The first CTC installation went live on the New York Central in 1930. By 1955, more than 20,000 miles of American mainline track were under remote control. Signal towers fell quiet as hundreds of jobs disappeared. Where once a line might have needed a dozen men to keep trains moving safely, now a single dispatcher could do the work of many, routing traffic and clearing blockages with the flick of a switch. But the real death knell for the caboose came with a small, unassuming box, the end-of-train device, EOT. By the late 1970s, the Federal Railroad Administration moved to require electronic monitoring of air brakes on all long trains. EOT devices, sometimes called flashing rear-end devices, clipped onto the last coupler, sending a steady stream of brake pressure data and motion alerts by radio straight to the engineer's cab. What once demanded a conductor's practiced eye, a wisp of smoke from an axle, a slackening of the train, or the sudden jolt of a parted line, was now signaled instantly by a digital chirp. By 1982, federal rules made EOT devices mandatory on most mainline freights. Railroads wasted no time. Within 3 years, nearly every Class I railroad had retired its caboose fleet. The numbers tell the story. Where more than 10,000 cabooses rolled across the country in 1970, fewer than 1,000 remained by 1990. Conductors who once rode the rails in their rolling offices found themselves reassigned or out of work entirely. A former conductor, recalling his last run, describes the feeling of watching the red marker light fade behind him for the final time. "I used to know every sound, every sway of the train," he says. "Now it's just a beep on a screen. There's no one back there anymore." CTC and EOT devices did what no economic pressure or corporate memo could fully accomplish. They erased the need for eyes at the end of the train. The caboose, once a symbol of safety and camaraderie, became a relic overnight. What was gained in efficiency came at the cost of a tradition that had defined railroad life for over a century. The tracks continued to hum with progress, but something human had quietly stepped off the train, never to return. On a cold morning in 1968, a brakeman stood on the platform of a nearly empty yard, watching the last cars of the 20th Century Limited fade into the distance. He wrote in a letter now tucked away in a museum archive that they used to ride those rails like they owned them. By then, the ranks of railroaders had thinned to a fraction of their former strength. Crews that once filled a caboose and 2 locomotives, including an engineer, a fireman, 2 brakemen, and a conductor, were pared down to just a pair, 1 engineer and 1 conductor. The Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers fought to keep more hands on deck, but the new era of automation left little room for tradition. Corporate memos from the late 1970s spell out the logic in plain numbers. A single diesel could do the work of 3 steam engines with half the crew and a fraction of the cost. The introduction of centralized traffic control and end-of-train devices meant that eyes and ears at the back of the train were no longer needed. By 1985, union agreements across the country codified 2-person crews as the norm. The rest were handed pink slips or reassigned to shrinking pools of yard work. The human cost rippled far beyond the rails. Towns that had lived and breathed with the rhythm of passing trains saw their stations close and their economies shrink.
In the break rooms, men who had spent decades on the line found themselves reading company notices announcing the end of the Super Chief, or the 20th Century Limited. The last run of the Super Chief left Chicago on May 2nd, 1970, while the 20th Century Limited made its final journey on December 31st, 1967. Each cancellation was more than a lost schedule. It was the end of a community, a ritual, a way of life. A historian reads aloud from a faded company memo. The memo states that effective immediately, all passenger operations not meeting minimum revenue targets will be discontinued. The words are cold, but the meaning is clear. The trains that once symbolized ambition and unity had become line items in a ledger. For the men and women who built their lives around the rails, the silence left behind was deafening. The disappearance of these trains was not just about machines growing obsolete. It was about people, pride, and the slow unraveling of a world that once felt permanent.
Across the country, the last survivors of the railroad's golden age linger in places where time seems to slow. In Pennsylvania, the Strasburg Railroad keeps steam locomotives alive, their whistles echoing across Lancaster County fields. At Steamtown in Scranton, the air smells faintly of coal and oil, and volunteers in denim overalls spend weekends coaxing century-old engines back to life. In California, the California State Railroad Museum in Sacramento houses gleaming streamliners and weathered cabooses, each one carefully restored by teams who measure their progress in years, not days. These machines survive because people refuse to let them disappear. Restoration is painstaking. Sometimes a single boiler certificate costs tens of thousands of dollars, and skilled welders or machinists are hard to find. Each part, from a brass whistle to a cast iron bearing, might need to be custom made. Volunteers log thousands of hours sanding, painting, and fitting pieces together, often learning lost trades from yellowed manuals or retired railroaders who remember how things used to be done. Every project is a race against rust, weather, and the slow loss of knowledge. Institutions like Strasburg, Steamtown, and the California State Railroad Museum invite the public to step aboard, to feel the weight of a Pullman door, or the heat radiating from a working firebox. School groups crowd around restored cabooses, while families ride behind steam engines that once pulled the 20th Century Limited. These moments are more than nostalgia. They're a chance to keep memory alive, to show how railroads shaped the world. Support comes in many forms. Some people donate money, others give their time. Museums run public programs and special excursions, hoping to inspire a new generation of train lovers. But the future of these survivors depends on continued interest and help. Every ticket sold, every dollar raised, and every hour volunteered adds another page to the story of America's trains. For those who want to see, to touch, and to remember, the doors are still open, waiting for new hands to keep these legends moving. Today, most people pass silent tracks without a second thought, unaware that entire worlds once thundered by, shaping the nation's pulse. As modernization erases the physical traces, even memory grows dim. These trains were more than machines. They were bridges between distant lives. Their absence leaves a quiet question. What have we lost? And who will remember to look for what remains? Thanks for traveling this forgotten line with us.